Internal Revenue Service IRS tax news. The postponed federal tax deadline applies to taxpayers living overseas. COVID tax tip 2020-81 July 7, 2020. Taxpayers who live and work abroad have until Wednesday, July 15, 2020 to file and pay their 2019 federal income taxes. So that's going to be the same deadline as everyone basically to this point has for the federal income taxes for the individual filing. And once again, it was pushed out, of course. This is 2019 tax filing, which normally would have been done or due sometime around April 15th, was then pushed out until July 15th. And so that July 15th deadline applies to people who work abroad as well. Back to the text. U.S. citizens and resident aliens generally have the same filing and payment requirements regardless of where they live. The July 15th postponed deadline also applies to non-resident aliens and foreign entities with a U.S. filing and payment requirement. Taxpayers who still owe 2019 income tax as well as estimated tax for 2020 must make two separate payments on or by July 15, 2020, one for their 2019 income taxes owed and one for their 2020 estimated tax payments. The two estimated tax payments can be combined into a single payment. So in other words, make sure that as they postpone these things, there's a couple things you want to keep in mind. One is that the payment is going to be different. You want to think of the payment dates as different from the filing dates. And the way I would think about that is basically to think that normally, if it was a perfect world, the filing of the tax return would just be an informational return. In other words, for example, in 2019, the IRS would like to get paid in 2019 when you are earning the revenue, and then simply when you file the tax return in 2020 for the tax year ended 2019, it would ideally be just an information return saying, hey, here's the tax liability I have, here's the payments that I made during the year when I earned the money, and therefore there's nothing due, there's no refund at this time. That doesn't happen in the real world because the tax code is too dang complicated for that to actually happen, right? So all we can actually do is make estimates during the year. We try to make those estimates close and hopefully a little bit above so that we get a refund at the end of the year or in 2020. So that means that the payments that you're making usually have to be done throughout the year that you are earning the money. The tax due date for the due date for the tax return is going to be separate. Now, why do you make the payments in 2019 instead of waiting until you pay the tax return? Because the IRS wants you to? Well, yeah, but because if you didn't, you'd have penalties and interest. So you want to your goal is to avoid penalties and interest and just pay the minimum of tax that you're required to pay. And then on the tax deadline, why do you file the tax deadline when you need to file it? Obviously, again, to stop any penalties and interest. So on the penalties and interest, they can be applied to late payments or they can be applied to the late filing. So for 2019 then, most people had already made their payments during 2019. If you're a W-2 employee, you already got the payment pulled out, hopefully, during the year for 2019. If you're a business, however, then you need to make quarterly payments. So again, hopefully you made the quarterly payments, already sometime in 2019. But if for whatever reason that wasn't the case, and you owe taxes at the point in time that you're filing the tax return, which then got extended to July 15th, 2020, then you're going to need to make whatever payment you need to make along with the 2019 tax return filing at that point. Also, and this is going to affect a lot of people that I think could be backed up in terms of their taxes. That means 2020 taxes, you have to be paying your tax for 2020 during the year. Now, if you're a W-2 employee, it'll be pulled out of your wages just like normal. However, if you're a business, then you got to pay estimated taxes typically and actually send a check to the IRS or pay them electronically in some way, shape, or form. And those were extended. So now you got 2 quarters that are basically due now because the other due date was extended out. So there's probably a lot of people that owe 2 quarters worth of taxes now. And you might be backed up on the payment. So you want to make those payments. And then if you can't make the payments, and there are probably a lot of people that because of the extension and everything that's going on, maybe they can't pay the taxes right now, you still want to file the return. Why? Because then you're gonna remove possibly the penalties, or at least some of the penalties for late filing, and then you want to pay as much as you can to remove penalties for late payment, and reduce interest charges, and then you want to set up some kind of installment agreement with the IRS, basically a loan type of document, to minimize any kind of problems with it, including penalties and interest, further penalties and interest, and just to be in good standing with the IRS. As long as you're in good standing with the IRS, then you want to avoid any further collection action or any kind of problems that makes it more difficult to negotiate in the future if you're not in good standing. So you still want to file and make sure that you reduce the penalties and interest and stay in good standing. Typically with the IRS, that's usually the best policy. Back to the text. So how to file electronically. Taxpayers living abroad have a number of electronic options for filing their 2019 tax return. One, we have the Irs Free File. There's a link to the free file here. Provides free brand new software for taxpayers who earn $69,000 or less in 2019. So you could try the free file if you earn less than the $69,000. Great, nice tool to have, a free file tool to have, but you have to be under a certain level to do that. And also, if you need to file a tax return for some state or something like that, or you have more tax needs than just a federal tax return, make sure that that tool is covering the needs that you need to take care of, because that'll make it easier. So obviously, when you're looking at the IRS, we're considering the federal responsibilities. If you have any state responsibilities, then possibly other software can help you out, and it'd be nice if the software can kind of handle both of those tasks at the same time. Back to the text. Free file fillable forms, there's a link to that here, is for taxpayers doing their own taxes and is an electronic version of IRS paper forms that can be filed online. It is available for taxpayers who earned more than $69,000 in 2019. Taxpayers can use commercial tax prep software to prepare and file their taxes electronically. The software uses IRS-approved electronic channels to submit tax returns. So then the next step up, typically you're thinking if you're under a certain level, you might want to use the free formats, which would include the IRS Free File tool. The Free File fillable forms is a nice tool to be putting together, but you have to have some more understanding of the tax code to do that, because the software doesn't kind of walk you through. It's not like it walks you through with an interview type of process like most of the tax preparation software is there to do. But all the tax forms and the instructions are on the IRS website. So if you want to spend a little bit more time, and you might understand things a little bit better if you actually fill out the fillable forms tax return in that format. But it is more difficult, and like even tax professionals at these days are pretty much reliant, at least to some degree, on tax preparation software that does much of the actual manual calculations for it. So it might be more difficult to do. In other words, the free file fillable form. So you probably want to think, okay, IRS free filing tool, take a look at the free file fillable forms, be able to understand it with that. If you want to file and you're comfortable with that, do so, but it takes a little bit more understanding to do. Next step up, then, if you're over the tax level, or if you want some different software that's proprietary software that might be better in some cases, because that's just what they do, proprietary software that could include something like an H&R Block software that you can purchase, or something from like Intuit, like a TurboTax type of software. Those are usually types of software that are geared towards individual tax preparation, and you can try those. Those are set up as like an interview type of process. Obviously, you'll have to pay for the software in order to work through that, but it's set up as kind of like an interview type of software, so it can help you out. Now, if your tax return is more complex than that, it's starting to get more complex, like your income's getting higher, you possibly have rental property, business income and whatnot, then you probably want to consider tax advice and tax preparation, both for the tax preparation process as well as any problems that could happen with an audit in the future, and for tax advice in the future, tax planning and preparation once your income gets higher and your information gets a bit more complex. Okay, back to the text. How to pay. The IRS offers several convenient ways to make electronic tax payments. So how are you going to pay the IRS? They typically want it electronically, So if you can make the payment electronically, that's what they are looking for generally. Now, if you want to try to make the payment, and obviously if you're getting a refund, you want the refund as soon as possible. So in that case, if you want the refund as soon as possible, you want to give them the electronic payment and see if they can deposit it directly into your bank, and you'll get it faster. When you're making a payment, maybe, maybe you don't want them to, process it quite as quickly. So they obviously want to process it quickly. So they want you to use the tax payment software. What you're trying to do, of course, is avoid penalties and interest. So, I mean, if you mail them a check and, there's social distancing and they just can't get around to opening it, well, that's no, I don't know. Yeah, but in that case, you might want to file a check. But they would like to, they're trying to go to the system where they're going to have electronic payments. So that means they have the IRS Direct Pay. You can use IRS Direct Pay. You can use a debit or credit card. We have the electronic federal tax payment system. There's links to all these so you can check any of these items out. Electronic funds withdrawal, same day wire, check or money order. So obviously they put that one at the bottom. They don't really want to see the check or money order. And again, it might not take them to process. What you want to do to avoid penalties and interest is make sure that you have sent the check in before the due date of when it's due. How long it takes for them to process it. Again, that's kind of on their side. If they were to charge you penalties and interest, what would you have to prove? That you made the payment in good faith at the point in time that it was required by. So if you sent them a paper check, and you say that, hey, look, it went out, I got it to you within the deadline, then that's what you would need in order to basically avoid what you're trying to avoid here with making the payments on time, which is, of course, the penalties and interest. Back to the text. How to get more information to file. Those who need more time to file beyond July 15th, 2020 can request an extension to file. So there's a link to the extension here. To get an extension to file, taxpayers must do one of the following. So just to recap on the extensions, obviously, that normally for like 2019 would normally be due on April 15th or somewhere around there, unless there's some weird holiday or something that's going on. And then you'd have an extension that you'd have to file for that would avoid. Why do you file an extension? Because it then removes, hopefully, the penalty related to the late filing. It doesn't remove the penalty related to payments because those things are separate, but it'll remove the penalty and interest then related to late filing. And then you have until October to file the tax return. Now, what they did now is they extended the normal deadline from April 15th to July 15th. You could still file an extension on July 15th. They didn't extend the due date for the extension time period, however, so it's still in October, but you could still file the extension at this point and then go to the normal extension deadline at that time. And then we're back to normal, hopefully, by that time, till something next funny thing happens. Back to the text. File Form 4868. There's a link to that here. Through their tax professional, tax software, or using Irs Free File on irs.gov. A very simple tax form to file. The 4868 should be a really easy process to do. The most complicated thing on it usually is it's going to ask you for an estimated payment to see if you owe any money. And most people say, I don't know what I'm going to pay. I don't know. That's why I can't file the tax return. That's why I have no idea. But the point is that you need to make an estimated, if you want to make the estimated payment, because remember the penalties you're trying to avoid, one related to the late filing, two is related to late payments. So you may not know exactly what it is, but your goal is to estimate it so that you can make a payment and avoid the penalties related to late payment items. And then submit an electronic payment. So there's a link to that here with Direct Pay, electronic federal tax payment system, or by debit, credit card, or digital wallet, and select Form 4868 or extension as the payment type. So when you send in the payment, if you owe money, if you don't owe money, you expect a refund, in other words, then obviously you don't need to make a payment to them. And the IRS basically doesn't really have a problem with that. Why? Because they see it as a loan. If you were going to get like $2,000 back, and you just said, nah, you guys can hold on to it for another 6 months or whatever, 4 months, whatever, then that's like a loan where they didn't, they see that as a loan. That's a benefit to them. They get to hold on to the money longer. So no problem on their side there. Just make sure that you tell them that it's a late filing issue. However, if you owe money, then you want to make the payment so that you avoid penalties and interest on it. And you can make the payment electronically using one of these tools. So you can send in the tax form and then make the electronic payment. If it's not through tax software with your tax preparer, then you can use one of these tools to do so. As you do so, remember to tell the IRS exactly what it's for. You want to say, hey, look, this is linked to Form 4868, the extension for the filing of 2019. Because if you don't do that, then they might link it to like 2020 estimated payments or do something funny and like send it back to you or something weird. And then, so you want to know, so you got to tell them this is the 2019 tax, tell them what it's for. Okay, back to the text. An extension of time to file is not an extension of time to pay. Even with an extension, taxes must be paid by July 15, 2020. So remember, those two things are different. You're trying to avoid two different sets of penalties here. One related to the late filing, one related to the late payment penalties. Those two things are separate. The extension will hopefully drop the late filing penalty, but not the late payment penalty. Then you make an estimated payment, which will hopefully drop the late payment penalty. And so that is going to be it.